think one of the most exciting parts about BVMS is the user interface, how an operator interfaces to the system to be able to watch video, play video back, do all the things that a user does with a VMS.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, like you said, very important. That's what your user looks at every day. They log on, that's how they access their cameras for live, that's how they access their cameras for playback. So let's walk through what it looks like from start to finish.
Okay.
All right, we've got the operator client logon screen here. You can see we've got our connection destination, right? That can either be a designated IP address for the management server, or it can be a DNS hostname. Here we've got our user credentials, user name and user password. We're going to use an admin level account for today's demo purposes, but of course every user can have their own credentials and their own levels of permissions for accessing the system as well. So let me type in my password real quick. And then we'll hit OK. You can see we're verifying credentials up top and downloading the configuration from the box. Down below as well, you can see the version build information that we're running, 12.2, and then the sub build if you need the specifics. Here we've got a pretty basic, bare bones operator client view. If I was to close this with cameras open, populated into the viewing panes, it would of course pop me right back where I was. But for these purposes here today, it's almost like it's a brand new fresh system that we just spun up. We've got cameras here in our logical tree, our viewing panes to the right, alarms down below, and then PTZ control in the lower left. But let's start with the logical tree. Here we've got our cameras. We've also got some folders which are customizable. We can put specific cameras into a specific folder. Like here we have the multi-imager cameras all separated out. We can also have maps. So here we can bring up the cameras that are on the map or the map itself. Here I've brought the map up, and you can see as I hover over the device, I can get a cameo pop up there with a preview view. I can also double click there and go direct to that camera. So you can populate cameras a couple of different methods. You can double click and it's going to auto populate, or you can manually click and drag and bring those over. Another nice ability that we have is you can add actual website addresses to your listing here. In this situation, we can actually bring up VRM Monitor, and we can go directly to VRM Monitor and get some insight into our system health.
So I think this is a really good way. I've seen people interface to third parties that have a web-based interface to them, or a client-based interface to those third-party systems.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have analytic and forensic dashboard tools that you're able to bring right into here, or you could manage your remote portal licensing through that as well.
Okay.
So moving on to viewing panes then. First thing they'll show you is how to close all the viewing panes that you have open. Right here is the close all feature. That lets me close everything that I have open for a clean slate. Let's bring a couple back over, and I'll show you some of the settings that we have up top. First and foremost, I can expand the number of viewing panes that I have, or reduce the number of viewing panes that I have. And this is definable by user permission. I say that because you may not have every user wanting to have access to 30 camera views. They may only have to watch 8 cameras, so you can lock them into that level as well.
Also a handy tool if you've got a network that can't handle tons of users with lots of interfaces open
Absolutely.
at the same time.
Absolutely. Yep, best to be conscious of that as well. So let's bring it back down. We'll leave it at 4 panes, and let's bring in a couple of more cameras. All right. Up in the top left of the viewing panes bar, we've got the ability to hide the headers on the individual panes if we're not using that information or need to know exactly which cameras they are, or say if that information's already been duplicated inside. We can hide that and create a little more space for ourselves. And we can also go full screen. If we have a station that is not going to be doing any kind of playback research or any kind of manipulation of the cameras and changing our views, a static setup, we can just leave this as a full screen setup for that user. From the alarm pane, and if alarm comes in, we can actually double click that alarm, or we can go switching to an alarm display from the header here. We have the ability to print an image from a attached network printer, or if this workstation is directly attached to a printer, We can print the image that we're looking at here from a selected cameo or multiple cameos. We can save a screenshot to the local disk or to a removable disk. And then we have some options for favorites and bookmarks. Before I talk about favorites and bookmarks, I want to come back to that because I want to talk about the alarm pane here and kind of show that, and we'll kind of round out and come back to that category. But this is where our alarms come in. So this is important if there is a alarm that comes through for a perimeter crossing or some kind of incident on site. We want to make sure that we see it, or perhaps a system failure. So right now we have no alarms in the field, but if you want to go ahead and unplug our VRM server there, if we give ourselves about 10 seconds or so, we should see a failure pop up.
So health monitoring is a good use for this.
Absolutely. As you can see, it popped right up. It's telling us that our VRM is disconnected. The alarm is currently active. We would need to initiate a workflow to clean that up and acknowledge that, the date and time that it came through, and the priority level. Priority level is important because certain alarms can have a higher priority level than others. I would say it's more important for us to know that the system is not recording anymore than it is perhaps for a simple line crossing analytic that we had that triggered in the system. We would want that to stay at the top of the field. If it has a higher priority, such as level 1, level 5, it'll show up above level 20. Here you can see the device that was disconnected and the status. If you go ahead and plug that back in 10 seconds or so, we should see it reconnect and give us that confirmation.
One other thing I do want to point out is you can associate colors to these lines. You can also associate wave files or audio files to bring the user's attention to them.
Yeah, absolutely. Draw your attention to anything that may pop up. You can also force a user out of a full screen view to initiate the workflow or respond to an alarm and call them off of something they may be doing, such as PTZ control if something more important happens.
Okay. Notice it did come back online?
It did, yeah. It says that we're connected here. So we know exactly what happened. What we're going to do is go ahead and clear this alarm out. So I've accepted it, and I'm going to clear it right out of the log. That way the next user doesn't come in and see it sitting there.
Okay.
All right. Finally, as far as interface goes, let's talk a little bit about the PTZ control feature down here. We've got the MIC camera here on the desk with us. We can either use the viewing pane to click, drag, and do our view that way, or we can use the controls down here to move. Now we've got the digital zoom in that's available to us. We've also got the optical zoom that's available to us at these controls down here, so it's a little more intuitive, a little more in-depth. We've also got our focus and our iris open.
Those things are typically automatic for most of the modern cameras, but for some reason if we need to make a fine adjustment to focus if the camera's hunting, or if, let's say, something is in a shadow where the camera's looking at a broad field of view, we can manually override the iris and brighten the picture up to be able to see what's in that shadow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important that you still have that manual capability available to you. Here we've got some settings for predefined positions and aux commands. If I have predefined positions where I want this camera to look at a choke point for vehicle traffic, or any other point of interest that is predetermined, we can go ahead and set those prepositions and automatically trigger to them.
Those are good for alarms. When you have PTZs reacting to alarms, it can automatically steer the camera to those type alarms. Or like you said, just, hey, I want to check things very quickly instead of having to take the time to manually point them. The operator can just select those from that drop-down box and the camera will automatically respond to those locations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have our aux command, so if we have a pathing set up for the camera, we can go ahead and initiate that with the aux command here or any other kind of interface that we have within BVMS for the PTZs.
Auto pan's one, I think, that gets used a lot where the camera automatically is programmed to go back and forth between a couple of stops and cover a broader area with that one camera.
Right. So that's where we have the PTZ controls is down here in the lower left. I do want to go back to our favorites and our bookmarks that I promised you we'd return to here. One final note before I do so is we do have the talk down microphone available up here. If you have a camera that has a connected microphone and speaker local to it, you are able to do your two-way audio and talk down through this button here. All right, so favorites and bookmarks. Let's start by creating a favorite. So let's see. Let's bring this device over here. These 4 views, as I have them, are very interesting to me. For whatever reason, I'm tasked with watching them every day, right? It's 4 common areas. I want to be able to quickly switch to these cameras with the click of a button without click and dragging or modifying my view in any way. What I can do is I can just go create a favorite, and I can just call it Mike's favorite, and we hit OK. It goes into our favorites tree down here. You can see I've already got a couple, multi, all, and then I've added my Mike's favorite. All I do is I can double click and it will bring those immediately up to me so I can view them. Here we can see I can switch quickly to the multi-sensor view that we have saved, or I can switch to a arrangement of panes that I have customized. So one of these cameras is more of a priority. I've made it larger to take up more of the viewing panes. The others are kind of auxiliary. So a couple of different options that you have with the favorites and a little flexibility. One of the nice recent features that we have with BVMS now is the ability to export and import these favorites, and that transcends to the bookmarks that we'll talk about as well. The nice thing there is if I have a list of favorites that I have a new security officer starting tomorrow, they are tasked with watching a select set of cameras, and I just want to share them with them, but they may have access to the full logical tree for other priority concerns in case there's some kind of incident response they need to partake in. I can export these favorites, share them with them, and they bring them right into their own setup and they're able to have them.
Awesome.
So you can share them between users. All right, moving on to our bookmarks down here. Bookmarks work kind of 2 different ways. Essentially what a bookmark is it's a dedicated timestamp in the recording that you can refer back to. So it works 2 ways, like I said. You can have a bookmark that you've created during live. Say something's happening right now. This selected number of cameras that we have, this point in time, is going to be of interest to us later. We want to look back on this exact moment because something is happening and we need to capture it. What we're able to do is select all of our devices, and then we can go ahead and create that bookmark. It automatically fills in the time and selected devices that we have here, and we can put a title to that bookmark as well. We hit OK, and it drops it right into our bookmark tree. Now we can click on a bookmark and go back to that. So this one is the other side of the bookmark story, which is looking back at recorded footage. We can double click this. It brings up a predetermined time frame, a select number of cameras, and those views of those cameras, and populates them for us. So the value here is this should be part of any larger incident investigation that occurs. If you have an incident report of something that had happened, you can export this, share it with your supervisor, or save it for later for them to review, and then validate your findings.
I think bookmarks is probably something that is very underutilized in a lot of systems that I've seen, but I think it's a very helpful tool and saves a ton of time when it comes to searching for video or searching for a specific event where somebody may have thought, you know what, I remember something that had occurred. I don't really remember what time it was, but I think it occurred between 7 o'clock and 7:45. Somebody's got to then spend the time to go back to 7 o'clock and start looking for what that specific event was, where if somebody would have just clicked on the create bookmark and, you know, if something occurred that was a little bit different, click on the create bookmark, click OK, and it allows the supervisor or somebody else to find things very quickly in a search, either later on or almost immediately after the event.
Yeah, when in question, there's no harm, right? Make
Exactly.
the bookmark. You can always investigate it later, come back to it, and if you determine it's nothing, just delete it.
Delete it, yep.
Yep, and move on. Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, these are able to be exported and then shared with other users, so it can be part of a larger submission for an incident report. All right, so that really covers the live side of BVMS. We went through the logical tree, we talked about our favorites, we talked about our bookmarks, and we did look at one of our maps that we had in there as well. What I'd like to do now is switch over to the playback side, which is more of our investigation side of the software, and kind of go through that because the interface is a little different. But before I do, I want to make sure I close out all my windows. We'll start with a fresh lookout here. All right, Right here is where we switch over to our playback mode. We want to clear that out. Our bookmark had brought that up for us. But you can see that there's been a slight change. We have more tabs available to us on the left-hand side, and our alarm pane down below has changed as well. The logical tree and the viewing pane windows do remain pretty much the same, though.
One thing that I think is really cool about BVMS is everything that's presented to you in the live side of BVMS operator client is extended over to the playback side of BVMS client. So I know you're going to cover some of that stuff, but I think that's a nice key feature in terms of user ease. You don't have to learn two separate things for live and playback.
Yeah, most of the buttons remain the same. You can see that the top of the viewing pane commands remain all here. My logical tree hasn't been modified at all. We're really just adding some additional tools to your toolbox.
Correct.
Okay. So let's start by bringing a couple of cameras in here. And you can see as I do, we're immediately getting some population down below here. This is our timeline and really our controls for our playback. You can scroll in and out, and this will change the increments and the timeline that you have available to you. So there's a little bit of click and drag as well as scroll navigation that makes this a little more user-friendly. But if you want to get granular, there are some tools here that can really help you to narrow down your search a lot easier. One thing I will say is as soon as you bring in these cameras, you can see that these timelines are all aligned and synced. They're all on the same timeline. So as soon as I hit play, they're going to start playing in parallel to each other with a single click of a button. All right, so up top here, we've got some navigation for really the top-down view of the timeline. If we have an incident that happened weeks ago that we're just learning about and we want to really pull the timeline out and go back that far, we can go as far back as 4 weeks with a single click, and then of course we could scroll if we needed to go further. Or we can go as recent to the latest 15 minutes. There is zoom in and zoom out buttons next to it, and next is our speed control. So our playback controls determine forward, backward, but this speed control lets us change from 1, which is the standard speed, forward, to you can go half speed, quarter speed, eighth speed, or you can go twice as much, 4 times as much, 8 times as much. So if you want to go and manually review a lot of footage, it may benefit you to speed it up and view it at a quicker pace. We can play backwards, we can go single frame, or we can jump to oldest recording. We can pause, we can play forward, we can single frame forward, or we can jump to the latest recording. So let's go ahead and hit jump to latest recording. You can see it goes all the way to the end of the timeline, and the cameras are continuing to record here, and you can see that designated by the blue color. Now, we do have colored timeline that's available in BVMS as well. Alarms can be designated to come in as red, and motion alarms can be designated to come in as yellow. That can be set up in the configuration side, but it is optional. You don't need to have that.
Especially handy if you have a big facility with lots of cameras that don't have a lot of activity. It'll allow you to see where there was events with a quick look into the timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. Beyond the playback controls, we can actually put in an exact date and time. If we have a third-party software that is indicating some kind of alert last week at 4:15 p.m. that we need to investigate, instead of scrolling through the timeline, I can put the date, 4:15 p.m., and it's going to take me right to that point in time for the cameras that I have selected. So that option is still available to you. Moving over here, we have the Go To Now, which is kind of similar to the Jump to Latest Recording, but in the event that a camera has stopped recording, one singular camera has stopped and others continue, you can jump to wherever the management server believes is the current point in time.
Okay.
So a little bit of distinction there. Moving on, we do have export video function, which we will cover. But I want to cover a little bit of the playback side of the house for favorites and for the bookmarks while we're here. All right, so the favorites and bookmarks work on both sides. We've already talked to the bookmarks, really. That's your point in reference that you can go back to, available on the playback side of the house. But favorites also enable me to do the exact same thing I was talking with live, referencing a select set of interesting devices, I can easily bring those up and I'm able to review those cameras in playback. So if I wanted, I can double click my multi-sensors. I can say scroll out in my time window, and I'm interested what happened with these specific devices between 5:45 and 5:50. And I can simply just click and drag the timeline there. I could further create another favorite that just has this, or I can bookmark this timeline as well. It's available to me on both sides of the house. The bookmark side of this remains very similar to the live. In fact, as we click on these and acknowledge these bookmarks, they're automatically going to bring us into the playback side of the house, as you saw earlier in the demonstration. The final part of the operator-client experience and the playback side is with forensic search. I'm going to bring this up here, but we would really like to cover this in its own dedicated segment.
Yeah, we will do a separate video to cover that completely on its own.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll go in depth there. We'll talk about syncing, unsyncing timelines, and some other cool stuff to come. But that about covers the base operator client.